now that we finally have our basic behavior tree set up to use for our stuff, we can get into making dialogue choices, because that's the entire point of a dialogue tree, to make choices and have different dialogue play out as a result. We're going to need to set up a few extra widgets and then do some coding, so let's straight away just get into it. We're going to set up the dialogue choices much in the same way that we did for the dialogue boxes themselves. That being, in our widgets, we have this dialogue display that's going to be taking in a new sort of widget in a moment, instead of just a dialog box, and that is going to help us do what we need to do. So let's start by making that new user interface widget blueprint user widget, which will be WBP. We'll call this a choice box. We'll open that up, but we don't do anything with that quite yet, because we also want to make a new user interface widget blueprint user widget WBP choice button. And that is the one that we're going to be making first here. So we'll set this up to have a size box in which we have a button in which we have a text block. I'm personally going to set the text to being black and the button just to being gray. You can style this however you want, obviously. And let's set this to desired on screen real quick. And I like to then go into the size box and set the minimum desired height and width to a value that works for me. So I have an example here on my other screen. The width I personally set to 1200, and then the height I set to about 50, so that it's at least this big. You can of course make this like 600 to make it a little bit less enormous. Let's go with 600. That seems pretty good for now. And if we then copy over a bunch of text, you can see that it grows as it gets more text. So we at some point also want to set the maximum height and width. Maximum height, let's set that to 150, so that would be about 3 lines of text in our case, and the maximum width, let's set that to about 1500 maybe. And we can see that it becomes no larger than that. I think 1500 might be a bit too much. Let's just set this to 1000. And if we then go into the text and we set it to auto wrap text, it's going to wrap the text properly and scale the button with it. Personally, I also want to set the alignment to being left and top aligned. So that way, if we go back to just having it say normal text block, it is aligned to the left top. You can also do it left middle. It's a little bit of difference. This is a little bit more symmetrical, but at least it won't be in the center. Unless, of course, you want it to be in the center, in which case that's fine too. Now, going into the event graph for this one, we want to make sure that our text is marked as variable, because of course we're going to be setting that on construct. So on construct, we get the text block, we set text like this, and the in-text will be a variable, which we can just call text or something like that. And we will expose that on spawn, make it instance editable, and then we also make one more variable here, and this will be the button index, because we're going to be spawning in a handful of these buttons. We want to be able to refer back to them with a index easily. So we're going to set this to integer, expose that on spawn as well, like this, so that whenever we spawn these in, we can assign them a number so that they are identifiable. Now, going into our button here, we want to set an onClicked event, and that onClicked event is just going to forward an event dispatcher. So we create an event dispatcher, and we call this something like button clicked. And then in the inputs for this event dispatcher, we're going to be adding a new parameter, which will be an integer, and we'll call that the index. So when we click on the button, we're going to call that event dispatcher and send through the button index of this specific button. That way, whatever thing is going to be listening to these event dispatchers will get a message that a button was pressed, as well as the index of which button was pressed, which we can then use to drive logic, saying that, hey, if button 1 was pressed, we do this code, and if button 2 was pressed, we do this code, and so on and so forth. So that's the entire setup for our choice button. That is now more or less finished. So we can move into going to the choice box. This is the thing that's going to be holding a handful of these buttons. So in this one as well, we're going to be putting in a size box, which let's set this to desired on screen real quick. And we're going to set a minimum width and height and a maximum width and height as well for these. So the minimum width I'm going to set to 600 as well. And the minimum height we're going to set to about 60. Just a little bit more than the actual individual buttons. Then the maximum desired width I'm going to set to about 1000 as well. And then the maximum desired height will be the maximum amount that we can display as far as like the different buttons go. So the buttons themselves can be up to 150. That's 3 lines in total. So let's set the maximum to 300 in this case. That would be 6 singular lines of text, more or less, with the size that we have at the moment. I like to then also put a scroll box in that in case we add in buttons that go beyond that, so that we can still scroll down and see all of the different options. That's entirely optional, of course. And then we put in a vertical box inside of that scroll box, and that's where we're going to populate the thing with the different buttons. And that is all the setup that we're going to be doing for the time being in this choice box itself. So let's go into the event graph, but not before making sure that our vertical box is set to variable. I always forget to check that kind of thing. And we'll make an extra variable in here as well, and this will be your choice options. So this is going to be an array of texts. So we set it to text. Then down here we set it to being an array, and we just compile that real quick. We can make that instance editable and also expose this on spawn, which is quite important. Then on event construct, we're going to get that array and we will for each loop over it. Because for each one of the options that we give in when this thing spawns in, we're going to want to create a button that has the text of that option. So we will create a widget of type choice button that gives in a text, which will be the text of our corresponding array, and a button index, which will just correspond to that array index. And that will just simply be added to the vertical box. So add child, and we put the just created button into that content slot over there. And this is all that you really need to do. You could also assign like an event in here to run. So when that button is clicked, to send that through, but you can also directly map to that later in the actual like behavior tree logic. This just makes it a little bit easier to access. So we're going to do that. Let's make an extra event dispatcher here then and call this choice clicked. And this is also going to have, of course, then an integer, because all that this is really going to do is it's going to take the button clicked that we made in the button and forward it to another thing. This way we only have to listen out for one event dispatcher and we don't have to like listen out for a bunch of different ones, which can get a little annoying to deal with fairly quickly. So it's just going to take in the index from the buttons and it's just going to send them through whatever is listening to this thing. It's just going to make some of the code later on a little bit easier to set up. And now we can already, with this, more or less, start adding in choices. We don't really have a method to deal with doing anything with those choices yet, but we very much could. So let's make a new behavior tree task to deal with being able to set up these kinds of choices. At the moment, I'm not going to link all these choices into the single displaying of just one little bit of text, because the moment you get into different choices and those having to potentially like run different codes on different outcomes, it just makes more sense to do this entirely in a behavior tree instead of hard coding it into like your characters or whatever. So let's open up that behavior tree and make a new task. And we'll make a new task based on BT task blueprint base, of course. We'll call that dialogue with choices. And as usual, we receive execute AI. And for this, we can actually take some stuff from the run dialog usual version, because we still need to do this casting to the character, get the active display, clear it out, add in a little bit of text above the dialog choices that we're going to get, or under it, depending on what you prefer. Add that to the widget stack. Then we're not going to do the bind to on text finished, because that is going to be driven by picking a choice. So let's just copy all of this stuff over, just to save us the headache of having to set this all up again. And this text is going to need to be a variable. That is going to be exposed. After we've done all that, we create a new widget again. we create widgets, and we're going to be choosing the dialogue or the choice button box, the one that takes in the different options. The options also are going to be a variable, so that we can set the options on a per node basis. We expose it like this in the behavior tree. So in the behavior tree, we can make a node saying, hey, add in some dialogue with some choice options, and then we can say however many choice options we want into that behavior tree node. Of course, we also need to then add that to the widget stack that we have created. And we also, coming over our choice box, we want to bind to our choice clicked. We can pull over the event and just make a custom event, and it will make a custom event with the right parameters to it. So because we're sending through a integer for an index, this custom event is getting a index input parameter as well. So whatever button we just clicked on, that's what this is going to output. And the way to get that into our behavior tree is by setting it as a Blackboard key value. So we're going to set this as choice key, and we'll make that a Blackboard key selector type. And if we pull that in, we can set value as an integer. So we'll just take this index. I like to add 1 to it because the indexes will start at 0, but for a dialogue tree progression, it makes more sense from a design perspective to me to start at the first choice. A choice 1 is going to have a certain value, then choice 2 is going to have a certain value, choice 3 is going to have a certain value. It's just more intuitive to do it that way rather than starting at choice 0 and then choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, and so on and so forth. So you do +1, and that's going to be the value of that key. And then finally, we can finish execute because we've just chosen an option, and we can move on to the next bit of dialogue. And this is effectively all that we need to do to set this up. It's actually remarkably easy because we set up so much code in specifically the last video to support everything going forward. This is really all the coding that we have to do. So now if we go into the behavior tree again, we can, instead of ending the dialogue here, we can set a dialogue with choices, which you do need to save all this stuff before adding it into the behavior tree. So let's try again, dialogue with choices. And here we get the text. So who are you? That will be the text that he's going to be displaying. And then we get an array of options where we can add as many options as we want. We get a choice key. So this is going to be the key that is going to set the value to, the index of which choice we picked. So for that, we need to go into the Blackboard and add a new integer key. And for every choice that you have in your behavior tree, so choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, you're going to need to have a own individual integer key. So we can call this just choice 1. You can just set up a Blackboard that has like choice 1 through 10, and then you can reuse this Blackboard for effectively every behavior tree that's supposed to run dialogue in your game. Of course, if you run into an issue where you need to have more than 10 layers of choices deep, you're going to need to start adding more keys to them. But for the most part, there's one Blackboard key can be reused on all your behavior trees for the dialogue. So let's just add a couple more keys as well. And we're going to be naming them in a moment. I don't want that to be a float key. We want them to all be integer. There we go. And then I'll just copy over the name and change the number from choice 2 to choice 3 and choice 4. And now we're just going to go up to choice 5. Don't be afraid to add in quite a lot of these because they're just integers. They are really, really quite light on like memory usage and stuff. So even if you don't fully use all of them, having a couple of them that you don't use isn't that big a deal. Of course, don't go setting up hundreds of these if you only need like 5. But don't worry about having to make separate Blackboards for every single one, because this one only has 3 option choices and this one has 5 and this one has like 8. There's nothing to worry about there. That's fine. Now that we have these key values here though in our behavior tree, we can say, okay, this is the first choice that we can make. So we set this to choice 1, and that will then get given a value of either 0, 1, or 2 plus 1. So it'll be 1, 2, or 3. So let's say, I'm your father, your worst nightmare, I'm your friend. Something along those lines, I don't know. I don't really write dialogue that much. Another upside of setting the values of these to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and not starting at 0 is that if something is set to a value of 0, that means that we haven't gotten to setting that choice to an actual value yet. So that's another upside to starting the count at 1 for this. Because right here, we can add a decorator, for instance, and we can add a blackboard decorator. And then we can simply check the key for choice 1. If it is equal to 0, we allow you to go through here. And actually, for this to work, we need to first add in a selector. This is just basic behavior tree stuff. So if choice 1 is equal to 0, we allow this to happen. If choice 1 is no longer equal to 0, that means it's either equal to 1, 2, or 3 in this case. We go into a different path. So we can add in some more sequences. So let's add in a sequence for choice 1, sequence for choice 2, and a sequence for choice number 3. We all hook those up to the selector like this. And then we can go into each of these blackboards and check, hey, is your value equal to 1, equal to 2, or equal to 3? And then we can add in like a bunch more stuff here. So then we do a sequence of, let's just do 2 nodes per, just to save me having to write a bunch of dialogue. So we connect those up like this. And if your behavior tree is getting a little busy, you can always just right click here, auto arrange at the very bottom, which will arrange things in a way that like makes sense and uses the space kind of correctly. So the first option was I am your father. No, there is no way that is true. Something along those lines. It's kind of bad that I think I know that scene more or less by heart. But then apparently we're just doing Star Wars here. So then we get a choice box again saying Obi-Wan never told you blah, blah, blah. And then we can respond again. Hold on, I think we just switched rules. It doesn't matter. This is just an example. He told me enough. He told me you killed him. And then we'll just remove the third one because I can't think of a third thing to say to that. So we just delete that. And we set the choice key here to choice 2. So whatever we say here, we're going to be setting that to the second choice key. And we can do something similar for equal to 2. So let's just copy this over and copy that over, hook everything up properly. And in a moment, we're going to go one layer deeper. So every single one of these will have its own sub-choices that can appear. And you can see how you can start building like very, very deep trees and make this all work. So your worst nightmare, I think, is the next choice we had. We'll ask, you're a clown? Because clowns are fucking terrifying, of course. And then we can say, please go away. Which gets us the choices. I'll never leave. Or, okay, sorry to bother you. Which we'll just set to choice 2. So, no matter what we're doing, which one of these 3 we go into after choice 1, each one of these is going to be setting choice 2. So we're kind of like reusing the potentiality to use key number 2, because we're only ever going to be running down one of these paths anyway. And then for the third one, I think we wanted a friend, so I like friends. You're my friend now. And let's say that this one just straight up doesn't have anything else going on for it, so we just end the dialogue here. Personally, I like to then take all of these and move them down a little bit more, so that it's visually a little bit more clear that, hey, this is all to do with choice 1, this is all to do with choice 2. But then, of course, we all have more choices to make. So instead of this just being a sequence directly, we need to set this up as a selector. So we take this blackboard thing and go selector to this, because this is the kind of like a subtree that we can run if choice 1 is equal to 1. But then, getting this selector and putting it on there, now we're going to be checking choice number 2. So if choice number 2 is 0, meaning that we haven't set it yet, we're going to be running the default choice 2 stuff. But if choice 2 is equal to, let's say, I think we had like 1 or 2, right? So if it's equal to 1, we do something. And if it is equal to 2, we do something else. And we can build out this entire behavior tree this way, but at this point, I assume that you kind of figured out what is going on, right? So we'll just set this up real quick, and I'm not going to bother you too much with it. So there's no way that's true, something, something, something. If we say just, he told me enough, we can make him ask, what did he tell you? And then we get, once again, choices. This is, of course, going to then be choice number 3. And then we can set, he told me you killed him as one of the options. He told me you are my father, something like that. Okay, and then this last one, if we said you told me he killed him, we'll just say, no, I am your father. And then, of course, we need to remember to end the dialogue, because that'll be the end of this one. But then this thing here actually needs to get a selector, because we're making more sub-choices again. So we're moving this blackboard from the sequence to there, because this one is going to be based on choice number 3. So we're going to check choice 3 and check if it's 0, give it these options, make it hook up to the selector. And if this is choice 1, we do another sequence here for both of those. So choice 3 is equal to 1 or equal to 2. Hook both of those up to their corresponding selector. And for these, I'm in both cases just going to say one line of dialogue and end the tree. So we're going to say, no, I am your father again. And if we say the other thing, we say, that little snitch. And that'll hook up to that. And then for both of those, also after that, we end the dialogue. So you can see, this is just one of the branches that we've been building out, but we're starting to build out like a proper dialogue tree at this point. And we could do very much the same thing with this entire branch or with that entire branch, should we want to. I'm not going to waste your time setting that all up, because it would just be more of the same that we set up over there. So let's go talk to this sphere who is apparently Darth Vader, I have decided. It says, hello, who are you? I've never met you before or never seen you before. There's one little issue though, and I'm going to be real with you. I entirely forgot about this. We don't have a mouse cursor, so we could in theory just like press F8 and that would allow us to like input things. We're like, you're at a clown dialogue now. Of course, we want to either have like a selection method to select certain boxes or whatever. But what we're just going to do is in the dialogue with choices, we're simply going to get the player controller and we're going to show the mouse cursor. So set mouse cursor to true. And then while we're at it, in the end dialogue, I'm also going to set the mouse cursor shown to false again, so that we can actually interact with this stuff as well. So, hello, who are you? You'll see no mouse cursor yet. I've never seen you before, but now it shows the mouse cursor and I can not quite interact with them until I click on it. That's to do with widget focus. We can just set the widget focus if we want to dynamically as well. So who are you? I can say, I think I am your father is the whole tree that we made. So we can, no, there is no way that's true. And then Obi-Wan never told you blah, 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 blah. He told me enough. What did he tell you? Obi-Wan never told you blah, blah, blah. Oh, I didn't change the text for that one. That's a me issue. That's nothing to do with the system. He told me you are my father. And then he says, that little snitch. And then the dialogue ends. Then we do need to click back onto the game to get focus back to the viewport again as well. There are some easier ways to get that all fixed up. So let's get all that set up as well. So we can go back into our dialogue with choices. And here we can, from get player controller, set input mode to either game and UI again or UI only. I'm going to go game and UI just in case we need to like press spacebar or whatever to progress some text. And we're going to then focus in on the active dialogue display from the player character. So that way we don't have to like click on it once to get focus and then click on them actually again to set the choice. And we might as well flush input because never hurts to do that. We already kind of are dealing with flushing inputs in our player character by checking whether or not there currently is a widget visible and doing different stuff with our input based on that. But again, this never hurts. And then in end dialogue, what we can do is we can set the player controller, set inputs to game only again. That should also snap back your focus to the viewport. So let's give that a test. Walk up to this guy. Hello, who are you? Never seen you before. We can immediately interact with this thing, so that's nice. I am your father. No, there's no way that's true. We can still interact with the spacebar because it is UI and game input mode at the moment. He told me enough. What did he tell you? He told me you killed him. No, I am your father. And then it removes your cursor and sets you back to game mode or game input mode, and you don't have to like click back onto the viewport or anything. As a quick aside, if you run into an issue where re-triggering the entire dialogue just randomly puts you at the very end of your dialogue tree because it seems to remember all of your choices, even though you might not want it to remember all of your choices. That is because with stop logic, there might be something that's going a little bit wrong with the Blackboard component on this entire thing. So we can either just fully like invalidate the Blackboard component, which is a hassle to set up. This is probably a good way to also set up which behavior tree we go back to in case you have a behavior that you should be going back to. So what we can do for that is probably on the dialog component, we can make a new function like run default behavior on owner, something along those lines. And then inside of our BPI dialog, we can do something like get default behavior tree, which will get us a BT asset of type, of course, behavior tree. Now with this, we can go back into our behavior tree actor thing. And in the interface functions now, we also have a get default behavior tree, which we can apply any behavior tree we want to. Of course, we can make some more complex logic to decide what behavior tree to go back into after going through this. So that's also quite nice. For now, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to make a empty behavior tree. And this is important. We also need a different Blackboard. If you use the same Blackboard between the two behavior trees, it actually persists with the data on it because the Blackboard itself is going to keep staying around. So it's going to be applying to a new behavior tree. So if you then go back and forth, you still have those choices saved out. So if we make a new Blackboard here, I'm just going to call them new behavior tree and new Blackboard data, and we set this to new Blackboard data, when we change over to this behavior tree, it's going to clear out all of your Blackboard data from memory. And then when we reload in the actual behavior tree itself like this, it's going to not have any of this remembered anymore. And then next time we'll set up our own memory system to deal with remembering certain choices so that we have more fine control over which choices we do and which choices we don't remember. So in our component here, we can just get owner and then get default behavior tree, and we can use that to also like get AI controller, run behavior tree, then we're going to run that default one, and so on and so forth. Now, if this doesn't have any implementation for running that, it's still going to cause issues, but just like don't skip on implementing that, I suppose. And then in the end dialog behavior tree task, instead of doing this stop logic stuff with the brain component, which again is a little iffy, instead we just get pawn, get dialog component, and then from the dialog component, we just run default behavior tree owner. And that'll fix all that right up. So if we go back into and now that we have that new behavior tree, we can say, hey, that is your default new behavior. So it's going to run that empty behavior tree, which doesn't really impact performance all that much because it's not actually executing any code. And we can go, hello, who are you? Well, we've done this about 100 times so far, so I'm just going to kind of skip through this. But no, I am your father. And then when I start again, it starts up again at the start at hello. So that's how we set up switching back to the original behavior tree, which is quite important. But also it fixes some of the issues where it remembers your choices for a second or third time through. So even if your character doesn't have a default behavior tree, you probably just want to set it to an empty behavior tree afterwards anyway for a resetting purpose. So we now have a fully functioning behavior tree acting as a dialogue tree. And once again, I think that this is the best way to do it if you don't want to go ahead and do things with like custom assets and stuff like that, because while you could set up an entire data asset based system, that will probably end up being much more of a pain to deal with than it is to just deal with restarting a behavior tree after this entire thing happens. So I would highly recommend doing it this way if you don't want to go into C++ and make your entire like own custom assets with your own custom editor panel, and which is just a little bit overkill if you just need a simple dialogue system. The wonderful thing about this as well is we're now using all these tasks to just update our stuff, but instead of just like doing this normal and dialogue, we can very much start up other code as well. So if you want to like start up a potential like secret boss fight through specific dialogue choices or whatever, you can make a blueprint task that will start up the boss fight of a like specific type of enemy or whatever, and you can integrate it in here. So based on your choices, you can also very easily execute any arbitrary code that you want, which with other systems is going to be exponentially more bothersome to deal with. So that's kind of everything there is to it. I'll make one more video about characters remembering what you've said to them. So if we go into this dialogue tree, maybe I want them to remember my choice number 1 and my choice number 2, but not my choice number 3, for instance, in this case, because that would immediately end the dialogue tree and just start me back at this portion of the dialogue tree, or whatever other portions might exist if I build out the branches on these sides as well. So that's going to be the final video next time in this little mini-series, which is starting to be not very mini. Until then, though, thanks for watching, and hopefully it's been helpful, and I'll see you all back with the last one. And for the full course, if you're watching this in the future, it should be all up on the YouTube channel already. But if you're watching this shortly after it was uploaded, there will be a link down below in the description to the Patreon where you can find the full course. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. A huge thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas,